All righty. How's that look? Everybody see that? Okay. Well, welcome everyone to today's Zoom/webinar/ meeting with PNSQC and Chris Cowell. Chris is going to be talking about Zoom like my cat, how to work better over video. So I'm really excited to have Chris here to speak with us today. Because as you know, everything is over Zoom these days, and it's probably a good idea to get good at it. So just a little bit about PNSQC. Our theme this year is quality coming together, which could mean a lot of things. People coming together, different technologies coming together, as well as different parts of QA, all with the goal of increasing the quality of the software that we're working on and building. Just a tiny bit about the organization. We're the oldest and longest running software conference in software quality in North America, and I think actually probably the world, although it's difficult to claim that, just as the NBA champions cannot really claim that they're champions of the world if they don't play everybody in the world. But we're a nonprofit, and we have speakers that like to share their own experiences, not as consultants or vendors, but their failures as well as their successes. Right now we have our call for abstracts open, and it's open until May 1st. So if you're on the call or going to be listening to the recording later on, you still have 48 hours to submit an abstract. And there's 3 options for that. One of them, that's one of the things we're changing this year, is that you can submit a paper, a presentation, or a poster paper. Each of those are described on our website. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can contribute and participate in our conference this year. Just some speaker benefits. You know, it's great to be able to share your experience with the community, but also at PNSQC, you get a lot of support as an author and a speaker, especially if you're a first-time author or speaker. And we really believe in lifting people up and having them share their expertise at the same time. Just a little bit about me before we move on to Chris. I'm the PNSQC program chair. Probably the first line there is the most important, meaning that I'm an avid cyclist, traveler, and a foodie. So I love to eat great food. I don't know how that's related to the cat and Zooming, but maybe Chris can draw that in somehow. Here's Chris. I didn't know that Chris is actually he actually graduated from Harvard and did his PhD in Berkeley. So he has a great academic pedigree, but I think we're here really to find out what he's learned over the last 18 months in Zooming with his cat. Do you actually have any cats, Chris?
I do, and you're going to meet him. You're going to get sick of him by the end of this presentation.
Okay. How many cats do you have? I know most people have more than one cat.
Just one. The other one died of old age.
Okay. All right. I think your photo is great. How was did your cat get into your hair?
That's all me.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll let you kick it off, and why don't you go ahead and start sharing your screen?
Okay,
and,
will do.
We'll let you do your thing. So
Thank you.
Welcome, Chris. Great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to rearrange some windows here and make sure, first of all, am I loud enough? Can someone give me a thumbs up? Yeah. Okay, good. And I think the windows look good. So now it's safe to share my screen. Let's do that. And I assume you can see it. If you can't, you'll let me know. And let me get the chat window up. So in case anyone wants to chat, I can see what you're doing. Okay, there we go. And I was told I had about room for about 30 minutes. Does that sound right?
Sounds good.
Excellent. Okay, well, here we go. So as Phil mentioned, I have I gave a poster and a couple of talks at 3 different PNSQC conferences. And I really love PNSQC because of how, Phil just mentioned this, how supportive and friendly the group is. It's really a great on-ramp to public speaking if you haven't done a lot of it before, or even if you have. So I really admire the sense of camaraderie. I've never done one of these off-cycle talks before, so we'll just see how this goes. Let's go through the agenda here. I've realized, we all know, anyone who goes to meetings knows that meetings are hard. They're unpleasant, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, and inefficient sometimes, and annoying sometimes. And then when you add in the remote aspect of working in the COVID era, and we're all doing remote meetings, they get even harder. So they're just unpleasant all around, I think. So my goal tonight is to share with you 10 tips on Zooming. And I'm using Zoom, obviously, just as a placeholder for any kind of video meeting system. And these are inspired by behavior that I see in my cat, Edward. So this is Edward. You're going to see a lot of him on the next slides. This particular behavior you're seeing here is not relevant to Zoom, but I just like the picture. I'm going to show you 7 what I'll call basic tips. And when I say basic, I mean, they really can be applied to any company, any kind of meeting. I think they're universal. And then 3 advanced or like black belt tips that maybe are more controversial. They might not work for everyone, all companies and all situations, but they're kind of worth thinking about. And my goal is for everyone on the call today, on the meeting today, to maybe come away with one of these 10 tips that they want to try in their remote meetings. So if everyone gets one, I'll consider this a success. All these tips have to do not with technology. I'm not going to tell you what the best webcam to buy is. They're all around behavior, ways that you can make your meetings run better just by how you act in your meetings. And I think it's really important in something like this for it not to just turn into a lecture or a seminar. So I'd encourage everyone to interrupt me literally at any time with any comments or thoughts. I know some speakers like to discourage comments because sometimes they kind of lead off on tangents. Like they say, questions are fine, but don't give me any comments. I don't think that. I think comments are great, especially on this topic. So any comments you can give me about, did these things work for you? Have you tried any of them? I would love to hear. And just talk right over me. For now, to kind of kick off the audience participation aspect, I would like everyone to just type into the chat window what city you're sitting in right now. And if you have a cat, what is your cat's name? And I'm going to start. Oh, that's tragic. All right, so far everyone is in the Pacific Northwest. I assumed that was true, but didn't know for sure. Oh, no cat. Oh, no. All right, I've just accidentally moved my, there we go. Dogs, okay, that works. Philadelphia, oh, wow. Carolyn, nice, thanks for joining us from Philadelphia. And Phil, you're in Beijing, I didn't know that, wow.
Right.
Fantastic, what time is it there now?
It's 8:40.
Okay, in Boston.
In the morning.
Wow, this is a much broader ranging group geographically than I had realized. Okay, well, that's super. And thank you for sharing your cat names. Here's why I'm talking to you at all today. As Phil mentioned, I've been a developer and I've especially around test automation for about 20 years. And then 2 years ago, I shifted to become a technical trainer. So a lot of my daily work consists of trying to think up ways to get people interested in remote training and engaged in remote training and find it pleasant enough to want to come back for day 2 of the remote training course. And I think an awful lot of the techniques that I've developed or that I've learned or learned from other people apply to any kind of remote work, whether it's training or just a normal meeting. So that's why I'm sharing these with you. I work for a company, GitLab, not GitHub. It's a competitor of GitHub that sounds like GitHub, but it's GitLab. That's got over 1,300 people. GitLab claims to be the world's biggest 100% remote company. I don't know how they know that, but I have no reason to doubt them. it is 100% remote. There is no headquarters for GitLab, which is kind of interesting. So we do a ton of remote meetings. Edward's background is that he is sort of a ham, loves to be on camera, and this quotation is true. Terrible, but true. Okay, so let's move on. Here are the 7 basic Zoom tips. So first of all, Edward's the first tip is based on Edward's behavior, that he doesn't really care what he looks like. And that leads to the tip of just turn your video on. People, for some reason, are reluctant to do that, although most of the people on this call have it on, which is great. Thank you. But consider this. Which would you rather interact with on a call? Would you rather interact with a black rectangle with a possibly misspelled name of the person you're talking to, or a possibly fuzzy or distorted, because he's too close to the camera, live video stream of the person you're talking to? It's a rhetorical question, because I think almost everyone would rather participate in the video stream because of the body language that gets taken away from you if you're just talking to a camera off black rectangle. The body language that we just take for granted during in real life meetings is much harder to read over video, but it's impossible to read if your camera is not on. Some people are reluctant to turn on cameras because they think they're having a bad hair day, or they're worried about the messiness of their background, or whatever it is. But we're used to how you look. We're used to your background. You look fine. Your background looks fine. Don't worry about it. One company I used to work for had a director of engineering that he was the boss of all of us. And I don't know if this was deliberate, but his background in his video meetings was set up in his garage. His home office was in his garage. So there were, rusty bicycles behind him, and broken kayaks and garden hoses, and it was just a complete mess. And I almost wonder if he was doing that deliberately to kind of set the tone, saying it's okay to not stress about creating an Architectural Digest, photo spread ready background for your Zoom calls. It worked really well, and I think it helped relax people. So don't worry about your face or your hair or your background. Just show us what you got, and it will make life easier for everyone. Here's a trick I learned. If you are doing your call through a laptop, it's really better to put it on a flat, stable surface like a table rather than on your lap or holding it. And obviously, one advantage of putting it on a stable surface is you avoid that kind of seasickness that happens when people are watching your background move like that. But another advantage is if you're in a house with constrained bandwidth, like I am. I got a bunch of kids who are on video for school all day. A stable background actually uses less bandwidth, and that's because the video compression algorithm doesn't send the entire content of each frame. It just sends the differences between each frame. So if most of your video content stays the same from frame to frame, because the background's not moving around, it has less data to transmit. All it has to transmit is, your lips moving and your hands moving. And it makes a dramatic difference, actually, with your network traffic. Okay, second tip. Edward likes to archive things. He especially likes to archive himself by putting himself in boxes. And this leads to the second tip, which is archive your meetings, record all your meetings. You've got video on anyway, due to tip number 1. And so it's usually trivial just to hit the record button. And then once I'm sorry, people are typing in chat. I have a hard time watching chat and talking. I'm not quite smart enough to do both of those. So if anyone, I'll try to look at chat, but honestly, just talk over me if you've got something you want to mention. What if you use a picture as a background? You totally can use a picture as a background. Like I like your tulip field there. I prefer personally to just use your background as a background. Don't worry about the picture. I find it kind of like a morale boost almost, or a bonding thing when I can see part of your life. Now, if you want to hide that part of your life, that's fine too. There are plenty of good reasons for doing that. But in general, I at least prefer actual backgrounds rather than pictures.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I had participated in another similar topic, and they were saying that a virtual background, you can see that Carolyn, sometimes when she moves her head, it kind of gets distorted around her hair and things like that. And sometimes that could be distracting.
Yeah, I think by now we've all seen that effect so much that, I don't know, I tend to tune it out. But you're right, it can be sort of weird, especially if you do things like put your hand near your head and then it doesn't know what to do with this area. Should it filter it or blur it out or what? And then someone says, attended a virtual tech talk, which was recorded. You found your nodding and some other gestures distracting. Oh, so like as an audience member, you were nodding, or as a speaker, you were nodding?
I was attending, just watching, but having the panel, the panel of attendees was on the side of the recording, and I was like, Jesus, I'm like, it's all I see is my movements.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting.
Slow it down a little bit.
That dovetails exactly with one of my later tips. So let's bring that up again, because that's pretty interesting. That's the opposite of something I'm going to say later on. So we'll keep that in mind. That's good. So back to this one. If you're recording, if your video is on, might as well hit record. And then GitLab records all of our meetings and we put them in a private YouTube channel. And if there's nothing sensitive or secret in a meeting, like if we never mention, say, a customer name, then we actually put it just in standard YouTube. Anyone can view a lot of the GitLab meetings, which is kind of radical transparency. I wasn't used to that when I started working at GitLab, but it seems to be the company culture. And as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, uploading videos to YouTube is essentially free. I don't think they charge you for that, which is astonishing. So why would you do this? Why record these things? Well, for one thing, it allows for asynchronous attendance, by which I just mean if someone wants to attend your meeting and they can't, for whatever reason, they can at least watch the video later. It's not as good as being there, over video live, but it's an acceptable substitute. And if they do that, we all know that it's rare that 100% of a meeting's agenda items are relevant to 100% of the attendees. Usually you're there for part of the meeting. If it's on video, you can just skip ahead to the parts that you care about, which is a huge time saver. So there's really no downside to recording that I can think of. Third tip. Edward doesn't mind a little chaos. I'm sure your cats are similar. He's always knocking stuff off of desks and messing up piles of papers, and he just doesn't care. And this leads me to recommend that you accept background interruptions. So, I mean, we all remember that, was it a BBC interview from like 3 years ago when the guy in the jacket and tie was being interviewed, and then his baby walks in behind him and the nanny like frantically tries to grab the baby and pull him back through the door. We've all had moments like that where, I don't know, a spouse comes in and asks where you put her shoes, or random interruptions like that. It's, some people go to great lengths to try to minimize those. I don't think there's any need to. I mean, which meeting do you remember better? The meeting where the baby crawls in and, pulls the laptop off the desk, or the 99.9% of meetings where that doesn't happen? I remember the baby meeting. So I think it's possible to aim for too much perfection in these remote meetings, and a little bit of background chaos is fine. I think it's humanizing. It proves we're all just people. We've all got things going on in our lives. It helps me understand you better. It builds morale, promotes bonding, all this stuff, I think. Share your real background. Yeah, we kind of talked about that before. And sometimes people think, well, you don't have time for these background interruptions. It's disrupting the flow of the meeting. And yeah, it is, but it's rare that background interruptions disrupt for more than 5 seconds, 10 seconds at max, maybe. And I think the advantages of getting a little peek into your life outweigh the disadvantages of wasting 10 seconds. So you may feel differently, but that's how I feel about it. Let me pause here. Has anyone done any of these things, like either tried to promote background interruptions or recording meetings, or does anyone have a company policy of have your video on at all times?
Yeah, I'd like to share something about the background thing. I have not here, but in my house, at another place, I have a really bright background. So I have to like put one of those Japanese screen things behind me, because otherwise it's really bad lighting. So I think it's important to really check that so that you're visible, because otherwise you defeat the purpose of having a connection, of having a person there if they can't really see you very well.
It's true. If this were more technical, more of a technical talk, there's a lot to say about how to arrange lighting and how to arrange cameras and all that stuff. And you're absolutely right that thinking a little bit about how to set that stuff up can go a long way toward making you visible. And it's possible to have a real background that really is kind of glary. It's hard to see.
Yeah.
Past.
Yeah. Right.
I like the recording part of it. In for example, not, maybe people can't make this meetup, but then I can record it. If it's recording, then I can push it up to YouTube, and it takes a little while, but then people who can attend the meetup can see it in asynchronous time. And it's Zoom actually has a way to just set that for any meeting to automatically record. And it takes a few extra steps to download it and then upload it to YouTube, but it's not that much of a hassle.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Larry, is this a new policy of recording sprint demos and retrospectives?
It was a previous job, but those were the two ones that seemed to have an audience outside the pod. So that's why they were sort of the asynchronous part.
And as far as you know, were they useful? Were they watched?
I'm not sure. I think there was, kind of, let's just have them in case, but I think, sort of getting used to the agile process. It was a new transition into that development style.
That makes sense. I think if you're working for a remote first company, everyone gets used to working asynchronously anyway, and this kind of recording just naturally fits into it. If everyone's in a building together, it maybe seems less necessary to do that, but I think it's still worth considering at least doing.
Just a question about the GitLab stuff. Are they like annotated, or so that you know which point in time to jump to if you're not interested in a particular subject?
Some very detail focused people add that kind of thing, but I would say 90% of them, no, they're just raw video dump. Yeah. Which is not great, but it's a matter of how much is it worth spending the time to annotate if you don't know if anyone's ever going to look at it. So, okay, number 4, this is not Edward. It's hard to get a picture of cats yawning. So I couldn't get a picture of Edward yawning, but anyway, he's not afraid to talk over you. If you're talking, and he has something to say, he'll talk at the same time. And so this leads to 4th tip, which is encourage spoken interruptions. So the last tip was about background interruptions, and this one is about foreground interruptions, spoken interruptions. So the idea is if I'm talking and one of you has something to say, just talk over me, and I should not be offended by that. Like I should expect that and actually encourage that. And there are a few reasons. One is that, if you think about the last real meeting you were in a room before COVID, and you really try to play it back in your head and spot the interactions that people had during the meeting. I don't know about you, and I don't have any hard data to back this up, but it feels to me like a remote meeting has about 25% as many interruptions as in real life meeting. In real meetings, when you're all in the same room, everyone's interrupting each other all the time. Sometimes it's so subtle, you don't even notice it's happening. Like someone might be just kind of trailing off on a sentence and the next person jumps in and it doesn't even feel like an interruption. But over video, we might not do that. We generally wouldn't do that. It's hard to know when is the right time to jump in video. And as a result, I think about 75% of the participation or interruptions just don't happen, which is bad. So it increases participation.
So can I interrupt you here?
Of course.
Sorry. So do you build that into your presentation? Because I run, about 7 educational live streams, and it seems sometimes like the speaker is like a talking head, and it gets a little monotonous. You're right. And then meetings are just dreadful sometimes, when my team, I feel like I am the talking head to my team. I was like, oh dear God, I don't even want to play back what I just said. So you're right. It's not like the live meeting where people are going to be, eating a bagel, the natural distraction at the table. Like, what do you do?
You can't force it to happen. All you can do is encourage it when it does happen and make people feel like, like you just said, can I interrupt? I'm sorry. Like, don't say I'm sorry, just interrupt me. It's great. I like it when you do that. So all you can do is give positive reinforcement when people do it. You can't force them to do it. The bagel example is perfect. I mean, it's completely standard to be eating a bagel in a room with other people during a meeting. But it seems like 90% of the time when someone's eating in a remote meeting, they turn their camera off. And like, why? I don't know. There's some odd psychology at work here that makes us treat meetings over video as being more distant than meetings in the same room. Different rules seem to apply, and I'm trying to break some of those rules down. I don't know if I answered your question exactly. Other than providing positive reinforcement when people do interrupt, I don't have a great way to force people to interrupt. And you're right, when they don't, it just becomes, deadly dull. It just becomes a seminar, which is no good for anybody. Because of the latency involved with video meetings, especially if you've got someone, like Phil from another continent, some kind of talking over people is inevitable. So no matter how carefully people wait for a period of quiet before they start talking, they're still going to talk over someone else who's trying to start talking at the same time. And I think rather than treat that as an awkwardness, we should just treat it as an expected normal part of remote meetings, and we should welcome it and just forge ahead. Now, it is important to notice that there are different kinds of cultural standards around interrupting. So at the risk of overgeneralizing, I think it's fair to say people on the East Coast of the US are in general more comfortable with talking over you, with interrupting. People on the West Coast, in general, not always, tend to be more careful about not stepping on your verbal toes. Plenty of counterexamples, but it's a cultural difference I've noticed having lived in both places. So there's a danger there, because if you've got 3 New Yorkers, 1 Bostonian, and 5 people from LA in the same remote meeting, guess who's going to potentially dominate that meeting verbally? So I think anything you can do to make it more comfortable for people to interrupt is good. One thing that I've noticed is sometimes when people are struggling to figure out when to interject, they'll kind of go on and off mute. And occasionally you can tell when that's happening on Zoom. The yellow border will light and turn off around their picture. And when you see that happening, I think it's good to just kind of invite them in. Hey, it looks like maybe you were trying to say something. Did you want to add something to the conversation? So invite them in to try to accommodate these different cultural approaches. Next one. Edward has this mechanism that lets you know when you're scratching him in the right place behind his ears. He vibrates and he makes noise and he buzzes, and it's all really great. And cat owners know all about this. And I'm going to call it providing upbeat reassurance and reinforcement. And Larry, this was the slide that I said might be the opposite of what you were saying earlier. I think it's really important to do sort of the human equivalent of purring when you're on a remote meeting. And I actually don't mean sonically, because that just adds confusion if you start making noise. Even saying like, yeah, I get it. Yeah, right. That makes sense. Even that causes other people to stop talking because they think you're trying to say something. I do think that moving your body in ways that shows that you're following and you agree, or even if you don't agree, just that like you're getting it and you want the speaker to keep going is really important. And that can take lots of forms. Believe it or not, just plain smiling gets a lot of good response from people. I mean, it encourages people to keep talking. And I already mentioned this, because of the latency, hand gestures are usually better than talking and saying, yes, that's good, I get it. If you actually have something to contribute rather than I get it, go on, then talk, of course. But in general, just nodding or smiling, I think is more useful. However, having heard Larry's comment, that's really interesting. So it definitely can be distracting.
Yeah, so my interjection would be, I guess maybe the idea of, movement for the stage versus the camera. Like the stage, you can be a little bit bigger and it's not quite as noticeable, but on the camera, I think it's amplified. So I think it was, after watching the recording, I could see I was doing a repetitive movement that probably nobody else noticed, but because it was like the same thing. So
yeah,
I think it's just make it a little less big, but maybe, or keep variety, so.
Were you nodding? Do you remember what it was exactly?
I think it was the nodding. Yeah, I wasn't interjecting verbally much, but yeah, I guess that those sort of thumbs up, or some of those other gestures you said, but
yeah. Has anyone come up with good ways of indicating I'm following what you're saying, even if I don't agree with it? Keep going.
Wow, it's funny. I remember on some of these Facebook sort of videos and things where people are singing a song or doing something, they have like the emoticons.
Yeah.
Blast a bunch of hearts, or a bunch of thumbs ups or whatever. So sort of new technologies to do the similar thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess you could like put emoji in the chat. I hadn't thought about that. That might get distracting too, because it's really hard to like look at the slide, talk, think about where the camera is, and also look down at the chat. There's a lot to track that way. But now
maybe a little bit out of scope, but I remember hearing some comedians that were doing shows during COVID, and it was like a drive-in thing. So instead of applause, they would flash the high beams or honk the horn. So entering some new things for giving feedback to a performer or a speaker.
That's interesting.
Honk the horn, but those are the high beams.
So this is Joe. I'm from Austin. Great presentation. Sorry I couldn't make it earlier. I've been on meetups all day, Colombia, Britain, Europe, all over. And I can say that it would be awesome if there was meetups that were like defined as passive ones, where it's just like a talking head, and there'd be like interactive ones where like the chat doesn't work or is disabled. Like if they can make that distinction or kind of push towards that, that would be awesome. And yeah, I think culturally, it's good to respect cultural norms, but I think everyone kind of wants these things. They want real interaction, or they just want a talking head, and they can kind of pick and choose. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents after doing this all day.
Joe, do you think it would work if at the beginning of a meeting, the facilitator just kind of made clear, hey, this is going to be an interactive thing. Everyone feel free to jump in, versus this is going to be a seminar. Just turn off your camera and listen.
Yeah, well, even in the advertisement, it would be ideal, because some people don't feel comfortable, but some people do want more interaction. Some people are networking for jobs. Some people are bored at home and they want to watch something they find interesting in the background. And I totally respect all those modes, but definitely some kind of definition up front, like this is going to be an active one, and totally upfront, this is what you get, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I kind of think as a facilitator, or in my case, as a trainer, all you can do is make your own expectations clear. And then if people choose to like this is going to be an interactive thing. And then if people choose to act on that, great. And if they choose not to, there's nothing you can do really. So I wish I had a better approach than that, but I don't. It's really hard in training land when, and maybe Carolyn can relate to this, when you just have like 12 black rectangles, or maybe one video is turned on and you're just talking at the screen. You have no idea if any of the words are making any sense to anybody, especially if non-English speakers or English as a second language speakers are involved. It's just really hard, and I don't have any good solutions.
Do you think it's a good idea then, if it's so there are different types of meetings, right? Like you just said, there's a training meeting, then there's business meetings where it's, a meeting update on the status of the business, or then there's educational type live streams, which are, someone is giving, like you were doing, educating us in something. So if it's a business update meeting, do you think it would be fair to say that it's okay then to say, hey, everybody turn on your cameras because we're all here to, for the next 35 minutes and time is of the essence to get an update on what's going on instead of seeing this little black square in somebody's, Facebook picture?
Yeah, I mean, I think the facilitator should be allowed to kind of set the tone of the meeting and set the expectations around interactivity. But then at the same time, the participants in the meeting ultimately have to decide whether they want to honor that or whether they just, for whatever reason, can't or don't want to and want to treat it slightly differently. I don't know if that addressed your question. Okay, next one. Edward is always, he's never reluctant to make time for food. If he wants to eat, he'll just go eat no matter what else is going on. And this leads me to think we should time our meetings humanely. So what do I mean by that? Meetings in real offices usually involve moving from room to room. And even if one meeting is scheduled to end at 3 p.m. and the next meeting is scheduled to start at 3 p.m., it rarely really works that way, at least in the places that I've worked. Usually you have a few minutes to get up and to stretch your legs and to, look at a different visual distance, stretch your eyes, so to speak. Maybe get some water, maybe go to the bathroom, maybe get a snack. There are all sorts of things that can happen. Chat in the hallway. There's like a built-in buffer in real life meetings that doesn't exist really with video meetings. These are all the things I just mentioned. And so I think it's important to explicitly schedule these buffers between meetings. So if you have a half-hour meeting, schedule them to end at 25 minutes after the hour or at 5 minutes till the next hour. And if you have a 60-minute meeting, schedule it to end 10 minutes before the 60 minutes is up. And in fact, Google Calendar has a setting, I think it's called speedy meetings or something like that, that lets that be the default. So I'm not the first person to think of this. And I found it really useful. We try to do that in my meetings, and what it avoids is like 4 straight hours of being glued to your seat because the meetings just never stop, which is not healthy or useful for anybody, either physically or mentally. Has anyone tried this in their work? Well, if you haven't, this is, I think, is one of the most effective ones. So I recommend it. Okay, audience participation. Which principle, which tip do you think? Sorry, there's a new tip I haven't described. Can anyone guess what the new tip is based on what Edward's doing right here?
Get comfortable.
Yeah, lie down. That's a good guess. Any other ones?
Present. Be present.
Be present, sure. Be here now, yeah. What else?
I was going to say show my belly, but I definitely don't want to.
Yep. I know it's well, those are all true, but I'm thinking it's this. Edward loves being near people, but often he'll like stand right on your chest, but he won't look at you. He'll look at the wall next to you, which is kind of off-putting and weird, but that's just the way he is. I don't know if your cats are like that too. And if you think about when you have face-to-face interactions with people in real life, you're often physically situated, kind of like these people are in this picture. It's very rare that you just like face-to-face talk to someone. You're almost always tilted at some angle. even if your faces are looking at each other, your bodies are often slightly tilted away at like a 45-degree angle. It just seems to be psychologically more comfortable that way. And even if you are tilted at an angle and you're looking at them, you're still likely to kind of glance away from time to time. Now that's really hard to do with video meetings where you're just staring like right at, directly at someone for an hour. It's kind of exhausting. And there was when doing research for this talk, I discovered there's a Stanford research project that was trying to identify sources of stress in Zoom calls. And the number one source of stress was excessive eye contact, which I guess doesn't really surprise me. So the tip here is face off axis. Now that could mean a couple things. I could mean a couple things by that. One is it could just mean like tilt your body. Well, my face is kind of pointed at the camera, but my body's kind of tilted away a little bit, or you can swing in your chair a little bit. That's one thing you can do. I think that helps. Another thing you can do, if you have a really wide monitor, or if you have multiple monitors, as more and more people do, is have like the camera over here, but I might be looking over at a monitor down here. So I'm really not looking at the camera. And one of the people that I work with at GitLab, I don't know what his setup is exactly, but every time I do a video meeting with him, he never looks at me. He's always looking off on the side. Now, sometimes people find that off-putting. They feel like they're not being paid attention to. If someone's not looking right at the camera, you wonder, are you doing email in another window? Or are you shopping for cat food in another window? What's going on? But I think if we kind of normalize this idea that it's okay to look away, even while I'm talking at you, I'm looking away, and that's okay because who knows how my monitor is set up, and it might be psychologically easier for all of us anyway. I think the more we can normalize that, the better. I have one son who's got vision problems, and so it's actually hard for him to maintain direct eye contact. And I have a stepdaughter who's autistic, and so it's really hard for her to like look right at someone. So in an effort to make the workplace accommodating for all different sorts of people, I think we ought to just accept there are lots of different ways you can orient yourself. Phil, you gonna say something?
No, I was just coughing, but yeah, I guess it depends on the different types of, the different moments in the conversation, right? Sometimes you really want to be right there connected to the person, and other times you don't, right? So I think it just kind of depends.
You're right. What you don't want to do probably is do that first thing again where you're really connected. Yeah, you probably don't want to do that for 60 minutes straight. That's hard on everybody.
Yeah.
So let's see. I think I've kind of talked about all this already. Yeah, I think we've covered all that. Okay, that's it for the 7 basic tips. Now we're going to get to the slightly more controversial tips, and I don't want to take too much time, so I'll speed up a little bit. These are the black belt Zoom techniques that you can try if you want. Maybe they'll work, maybe they won't. All right, Edward hates it when he's left out. Isn't that a great sad cat face there? Edward is not being able to play with these kittens. They are all together. He is dialing in remotely, and he feels left out of this meeting. So the way you avoid that is you say no hybrid meetings. So what do I mean by hybrid? A hybrid meeting is when some people are in a room together and some people are dialing in. So one approach you can take when COVID is done and we're all able to be in rooms together is to say, look, if we've got anyone who's dialing into this meeting, we're all going to dial into the meeting. And we're not just going to, the people who are together, we're not all just going to sit in the same room and dial in with our laptops. We're going to go back to our desks and dial in from there. The idea being that even if you're at your laptops, if you're in the same room, communication is going to happen anyway within that room in a way that's kind of unfair to the one person who's dialing in. So it's a way of leveling the playing field. It's also a good way of just giving your team practice at how do we make everyone feel included? How do we solicit input and feedback from everyone when some folks are remote? Does anyone have this policy at work?
No, but I think that I had not thought of it, and that's I hadn't thought about how the person feels left out. But now I think about it, I should have thought about it. because I used to work remotely from here, Philly, for my team in New York. And I always felt that they were just chit-chatting there in New York among themselves, talk among themselves.
Yeah.
And here I was stuck in Philly. I had no idea what they were saying in the background,
Yeah, it can be a real problem. And especially if you're someone who culturally finds it hard to just jump in, it can be really tough, for sure.
Pre-COVID, we'd have like a daily stand-up with 3 people locally and 2 people remote in India. And it ended up, it was a lot easier just to, for everyone to dial in remote, and it made it feel like nobody was missing out. Everybody was there, because we're all in the same space. So that was helpful.
So you think it was a positive
Yes,
thing?
yes, it was good.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
Yeah, I changed my angle here. How do I look, Chris?
There you go. That's much more comfortable.
I was just going to say that actually could work the opposite way around, where the person on the, let's say, speakerphone kind of captivates the whole meeting, and people end up talking to a speakerphone rather than to each other if they're local together. So
I suppose there are counterexamples to everything. Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, 2 more here. So Edward is a great multitasker. He's always doing all sorts of different things at once. And that leads to this one, which is really hard for a lot of people to swallow. So keep an open mind here and tell me what you think. Encourage multitasking. What do I mean by that? We all remember from before COVID, you'd get in a room, there'd be a meeting, and someone would say, okay, everyone, come on, laptops closed. Come on, we've been over this a million times. Close your laptops, pay attention. So one way to deal with that is to give up on that. Let's abandon the idea of everyone in the room paying 100% attention to whoever's talking. That might not be the most efficient way to conduct a meeting. It could be we really need to trust the judgment of all the people in the room. And if they decide, if one person decides this agenda item that everyone's talking about right now really isn't relevant to me, or I don't have the background context to understand what they're talking about, that happens to me all the time, it might be more efficient for them to answer 2 emails in the corner of the room while this is going on. I don't know. It's worth considering at least. And having them there, giving the meeting half their attention, is probably better than having them not there at all. And if they felt like, look, these emails are really important. If I can't work on them during the meeting, I'm just not going to go to the meeting. Well, I'd rather have you be there and just give me half your attention. Now, if this is remote and you're multitasking, and I'm doing emails over here in another window, I still would encourage you to leave your camera on. Don't worry that people will see that your attention is elsewhere. That's okay. We've already talked about the importance of normalizing looking around in different places. And if people are able to gauge sometimes, oh, okay, we're losing the interest of everyone. No one is looking at me anymore. Everyone's off doing something else. If I'm the facilitator, I probably should speed up or change the subject or check in with people or do something like that. So in other words, it's okay for a facilitator to say, hey, Phil, can you weigh in on this? And then it's also okay for Phil to say, yeah, can you repeat what you just said for the last 30 seconds? I was dealing with email. Like, that's okay. If you embrace this tip, number 9, and everyone's on the same page about accepting this, then it's perfectly fine to ask to repeat information and admit that you were tuned out. Don't be embarrassed about it. You were being efficient with your time. It's okay to be obviously furiously typing away at email when normally you try to hide that. It's also okay to push this to an extreme, to just leave halfway through. If the rest of the meeting, you know what the agenda is, if it's not relevant to you, your time is better spent elsewhere. We trust your judgment. Go spend your time elsewhere. It's completely fine.
This is Joe. Real quick, I've been in a few meetings where I actually was, I don't know how to say this, but more of a subject matter expert, but there had some nuances to what they wanted to talk about that I'd never heard of before. So I attended those meetings and I half listened the whole way, and I turned off my thing to not appear rude, But every now and then, like they get to a talking point, I was like, oh, I got to listen to this part. And that was a very common use case I've heard other people mention too.
And do you think like, was that a good way to split your time up?
Absolutely. It was wonderful because I got that little bit of like new innovation with that API or something that I didn't know before, or the new way that they like handled that thing. But all the background I totally knew already. So.
Yeah. Or sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's not that you know it already. It's that it's way over your head. You don't have the background context, or maybe you do, but you just don't care. It's just not relevant to you. It's not anything you're working on right now. Yeah. If they've recorded their meetings, you could always watch, you could not attend and record them and view the recording later. But then we get to some of the problems people raised earlier about like, well, how do you know what minute marker to scrub to find the relevant parts and things like that.
Also, there might be a question, for those. Yeah.
For sure. Yep. Yeah. Okay, so let's take this last bullet point. It's okay to leave halfway through, and let's push it to the extreme. This is the final tip. Edward is in charge of his own schedule. He never does. I'm sure your cats are not like this, but Edward never does what I want him to do when I want him to do it. And he often knows it's time to close the laptop, maybe even stand on the laptop and just do something else for a while. And so this leads to, hey, why not make all meetings optional for everyone? There's no such thing as a required meeting. And this sounds kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Idealistic, right? Crazy might be another word. But again, keep an open mind and consider whether it might work for your group. So if all meetings are optional, then the onus is on the facilitator, the person calling the meeting, to sell the agenda, to convince people that it's worth their time to come, convince them that they'd be interested in coming and they ought to invest in the half hour or hour that you're asking them for. So you sell your meeting by making a really great agenda. And this is, in one sense, easier than it sounds, because a great agenda can be super short, but it's also harder than it sounds because it has to be incredibly focused. You have to be very, very clear on exactly what you want to cover. And then you have to also have the discipline to not stray off into other topics during the meeting. And you have to be very clear on why you're even holding the meeting. What do you hope to get out of it? And the more precise you can be about this, the sharper you can be about the agenda and the expected outcomes, the more effectively you can sell it to people, and the more intelligently they can gauge whether they should be there or not. If they don't feel like they can accurately tell what's going to happen at the meeting, guess what? They're just not going to go. So this is a great way to build interest. If you then take notes on the meeting, in shared Google document or something, you might get some people who choose not to come to the meeting, but they might add some thoughts to the notes document, the agenda document, before the meeting even happens. They might participate that way, or they might add notes after the meeting by looking at the shared document. So if you try this and it turns out you feel like, look, I'm just not getting enough people showing up. Well, there are a couple of things you might want to think about. One is you might want to revisit these the first two bullet points. You might want to think harder about crafting a useful agenda and creating the expected outcome expectations. But there's some other possibilities. Maybe light attendance is actually better for the whole team, the whole organization. Maybe you're saving time for the whole group by only having 1 or 2 or even 0 people show up. I mean, think about it. If no people show up to this meeting, should it have been held at all? And you might say, yes, it should have been held. It was very useful for me, or I wanted it to be useful. If anyone had showed up, it would have been useful. The fact that no one showed up was frustrating for me. That can definitely happen. There's no question. That might mean that your priorities are out of sync with the priorities of the other people on your team. And it might be a management issue. It sounds like a management issue to me. It might be that different people are being, I hate this word, but incentivized in different directions, in different ways. And so you're not kind of all pulling in the same direction. Everyone might feel like they're being judged, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like performance evaluated in different ways that don't all help the team move forward as a whole. And again, that's a management problem. So if you're writing good agendas and you're making your expected outcomes clear and still no one's showing up, that's something worth raising with your manager, I think. Now, it's surprising how many different kinds of meetings work really well asynchronously, where no one shows up. So for example, let me take an extreme case. You might think a one-on-one is the one kind of meeting that cannot possibly happen asynchronously. I mean, the whole point of a one-on-one is you have one person, you have another person, they talk to each other. You'd be surprised how many people at GitLab, for example, have asynchronous one-on-ones. They have a shared Google Doc. One person writes their the topics they want to discuss. The other person responds in the document whenever they want to. And you can have responses going back and forth. If you have people working in different time zones, sometimes that's the only way you can do it. It actually works surprisingly well. Something like a status update. I mean, think about a meeting when it was you and 8 other people sitting around a table and you just went around the table with each person saying what they were working on. And you either didn't understand or didn't care about 90% of other people's status updates. I'm not the only one to have had this experience. I would way rather have had everyone just dump their status into a Google document and I could skim and just read the parts I cared about. Or something
How
like
has that been received? We have these massive 25 people status updates and I'm bored to tears.
Yeah. The teams I've worked with at GitLab have been small enough that we haven't faced the 25-person issue. But I would think the bigger the team, the more useful an offline asynchronous status update.
How do you suggest it? How do you suggest that? How is it palatable politically?
You raise it with your manager as a time saver, as an efficiency saver. You talk about 25 people sitting in a room for an hour. That's 25 hours of person time. And if you could reduce that to 3 hours of person time, because each of those 25 people is able to spend 5 minutes just scanning the document and adding their own status update, that's a big win. I would think, in some cases. That's how I would broach it with the manager. Yeah. So enough on that. Oh, brainstorming, that's the other thing. Often we have meetings just to brainstorm ideas. That's perfect for asynchronous. Just put ideas in a document and then other people can respond to them and you can keep it going back and forth. Those are my 10 tips. To summarize, they're the 7 basic tips. Leave your video on, record your meetings, accept background interruptions, encourage foreground, spoken interruptions, give positive reinforcement, time your meetings humanely, and face off axis. And the advanced ones, if you really want to be the king of the jungle and try something really fancy, suggest no hybrid meetings, encourage multitasking, and make all meetings optional. So I would actually love it if people could type into chat any of these numbers, 1 through 10, that you're kind of encouraged, hey, I might try this, or at least think about it some more. I'm curious what resonates the most with people.
For
All
me,
of them.
yeah, for me, I think the I think the off-axis thing was really helpful, Chris. And I think in general, what you're saying is that our video meetings are seemingly quite formal, but they don't have to be, and we can make them a little bit more informal and more interactive and less interactive sometimes if it's called for, which I like. Because it really reduces the stress.
I think that's a great way of putting it. Video meetings are more formal than they should be most of the time. Some of the time we want that for sure.
Right.
But there's just something about the extra distance that technology is great in that it brings us together, but none of us think that a video meeting feels exactly the same as being in a room with someone. That does add a layer of formality that really does get in the way sometimes. I agree, yeah. 9 and 10. Ooh, so there's actually some interest in the black belt ones, the controversial ones. That's great to see.
I have a quick question.
Please.
If I were to pitch this at a company, I'd be like, could I say something like, well, they do this at GitHub and they're doing fine. Is that like a fair thing to say? Like, is this a GitHub kind of like cultural thing there that you guys do?
Yeah. 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 Thank you. It's actually GitLab. GitHub's a competitor of ours.
GitLab. I'm sorry. I'm
That's
actually
fine.
a huge GitLab fan. I'm actually a huge GitLab fan.
It took me about 2 weeks after I worked at GitLab to stop typing GitHub into Slack channels. It was really embarrassing. We all do that. Yes, absolutely. Not only can you do that, but GitLab makes it very easy to research how GitLab does things. In other words, they have a company handbook that's freely available on the internet that explains, actually, a lot of these things are kind of borrowed or adapted from GitLab. And GitLab, part of GitLab's mission is to spread this asynchronous, all remote lifestyle, work style. So a lot of what I said is available formally, in GitLab's documents. And I'd encourage you to Google around. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
I heard an advertisement for a Slack competitor that was browser based, but they sort of pitched that it was more had like a water cooler feature, sort of browsing rooms rather than I have to put in the ID and then I have to like put this thing. Like it's the whole idea that these are sort of scheduled in the way that Zoom has them. This other tool seemed like it was easier to sort of pop into meetings without being, I guess, getting that idea of being disruptive to the folks that are in there. I know, like, I don't hear it with the Zoom, but like the chime when you sort of enter and leave, kind of removing some of those things so it's less noticeable when you come and go.
Do you remember what that was called?
Oh, no, not offhand.
Okay. Yeah, I'm interested in that. We had one company I worked for was an R&D lab. This was like 15 years ago. And they tried an experiment where they set up an always-on video link between the Palo Alto office and the Chicago office. And they scaled it up so that if I sat in the chair in front of the camera and I looked at the screen that was mounted on the wall across from me, a person sitting in the chair in the other office would be full size. So they were trying to make it look as close to two people just talking to each other through a wall as possible. And for 15-year-old technology, it actually worked pretty well. But it was funny. It never caught on. There was something cultural about people finding communication through video awkward. And I would love to know more about why that is. But the reason I bring this up is there's a lot of cultural baggage that we have to kind of overcome if remote meetings are ever going to be as effective as in-person meetings. And I think after COVID, my guess is there are going to be way more remote meetings than there were before COVID, because a lot of people are going to continue to work from home, is my best guess.
We'll be sending our avatars or holograms.
Yeah, exactly. And someone, Yingqi Kwang, says some meetings can be audio only. I think video is not always useful. Yeah, if you don't need to read body language, or if the information can be conveyed just through audio, I think that's fine. Yeah. Where can you get a copy of these slides? They live on my computer. I can send them to you. Yeah, that's fine.
We can also post them. If you send them to me, Chris, I can post them on the Meetup site and also on the PNSQC website later.
Oh, that's great. I'll do that. Sure.
Yeah, so thanks for sharing your knowledge with us, Chris. It's been fantastic. Just a note on in May, we have another meetup / talk, and that's with Yingqi Kwang. Yingqi is going to be talking about the pillars of enterprise quality. This is part of our management track that we're going to be focusing on, or one of the things that's going to be new in 2021 for PNSQC is a focus on management and quality, not just developers and testers, because as you know, we got to get these managers on board too as well. So great to have you today, Chris, and thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. And we look forward to having you talk at our 2021 conference. So what is your talk at the 2021 conference, Chris? I think it's on, what is it on? I forgot.
It's on static testing, like what can it actually do for you? Yeah.
Yeah. Much different than talking about your cat, right?
Well, who knows? It may be all Edward based again. Who knows?
Yeah.
Is your cat in the room with you?
No, he
Oh.
is not. He's asleep somewhere else. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next month and hopefully at the 2021 conference. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.